Thank you so much for the opportunity to make use of the start of this plenary slot for the launch of the collaboration strategy between ELIXIR and the Australian BioCommons. I will be joined by their respective directors, Niklas and Andrew, who have made space in their busy calendar to say a few words and explain a few things. So next slide, please. So what is the collaboration strategy that we're talking about? Some people might call it a memorandum of understanding. So it's a non-binding agreement. It's more a commitment, really. It's to exploit synergies between the two research infrastructures, because this is what the Australian BioCommons is, if you didn't know. This will be done mainly through aligning existing activities, but also new ones, we hope. And the purpose of that is obviously to increase the impact of their funding, which is mainly public and charitable by nature. So it was signed last April. You can see that there is a news item. Just search for it on Google. It provides a very good summary of what this agreement is all about, and also a link to the strategy document itself. I suggest you have a look at it because it provides much detail on existing thematic alignments between the two research infrastructures, for example, and it's really non-exhaustive, Galaxy, cloud, training, standards, tools, and basically these are the bread and butter of virtual research infrastructures such as ELIXIR and the BioCommons. So in terms of implementation, each research infrastructure is funding their own costs via existing instruments. So what does this mean? So if I take the side of the ELIXIR partners, this will mean ELIXIR Staff Exchange, ELIXIR Travel Grants, and if you've never heard of these instruments, I suggest you go on the intranet. They are open to you as ELIXIR partners. Only you are eligible for these. It will be also taking the form of a reciprocal invitation at flagship events, for example, All Hands on both sides. So as you know, the ELIXIR All Hands is normally only for ELIXIR partners, although we do invite a few strategic partners, and the Australian BioCommons obviously fall into this category, and they've attended All Hands in the past. Other ways to work together will be alignment of activities, as I've said it, either already funded or new projects. We will also have joint sessions at international conferences, and here really come to me with ideas because it has to come bottom up from your needs. If you have ideas, come to me. So that's from the ELIXIR perspective, but obviously from the Australian BioCommons perspective, there would be other ways to engage other financial instruments. So if I may now invite Andrew to unmute itself. Next slide, please. I've invited Andrew to tell us a little bit more about the Australian BioCommons because I realize some of you may never have heard of the Australian BioCommons. Next slide, please. So I've got a very few easy questions for Andrew. And first of all, could you tell us briefly what is the Australian BioCommons? We can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Corinne. Great introduction. So the Australian BioCommons is both a thing that's quite hard to establish and completely obvious for everyone who's on this call. And it's really the equivalent of all of the national bioinformatics infrastructures that have been established throughout Europe, including DENBI and the Swiss Institute for Bioinformatics and the Institute for French Bioinformatics and the Institute for National Bioinformatics in Spain and so on and so forth. And it's Australia's effort to consolidate what have been essentially duplicated efforts, I guess, around the nation using national research infrastructure funding into something that's both nationally valuable and internationally connected. And that's where we are at the moment. We've received funding as of last year to build if you like, the Australian bioinformatics infrastructure, and that's exactly what the Australian BioCommons is. It comes on top of a long series of collaborations, very effective with ELIXIR and also our friends in the US And we're very excited because we now have a sort of 5-year funding window to really build what we know Australia needs and reflects what's been happening so effectively in Europe through ELIXIR's efforts.
Excellent. Well, that's very clear. And I suppose I'm able to say that your main sponsor in Australia is Australia BioPlatform or BioPlatform Australia, maybe. I think it's reversed.
That's right. And we have a national funding agency for research infrastructures, and our money comes through BioPlatforms Australia, which is an arm of the National Collaborative Research Infrastructures scheme.
Excellent. Could you tell us a little bit better than I did earlier about existing synergies between the Australian BioCommons and ELIXIR? And I should say that you came a few times on the campus in Hingston and actually did a tour of Europe last year. So you know what you're talking about when I ask you about synergies. Yeah,
so we were in the fortunate position of not having any money for some time, which means that we could think long and hard about what we needed to do. And what we did do is to tour around Europe and the US, which are, of course, the extremely well culturally aligned exemplars of investments in this space. And we talked to many people throughout different ELIXIR nodes in Europe, and the equivalent, it's not quite equivalent in the US, but the National Institutes of Health sponsored the type equivalence exemplars in the US. And we came to the conclusion that what we needed in Australia to do was to not do anything ourselves alone, but to embed ourselves as closely as we can, as we could in those international equivalents. So the synergies are legion, okay? And some people on this call might already know of the things that we're involved in, sorry, particularly around Galaxy, around compute platforms and standards, and around training platforms and standards, around training platforms and standards. Actually, if we look at the list of platforms and activities and communities that ELIXIR supports, I don't think there's anything that we're not interested in. And I think that from our perspective, everything that ELIXIR does is global scale and globally relevant. So what we really want to do is to participate and contribute into larger global efforts around the exact same things that a research mature country like Australia needs for bioinformatics.
So I think you've started answering a little bit about that. So in particular, what will ELIXIR bring to the Australian BioCommons? And I will ask the same question in reverse to Nicholas after.
Yeah, so exactly what I just said, really. It's the bigger the community, the better, right? So what we want to do is join in with the global communities that are forming around global standards and that ELIXIR is exemplifying throughout Europe. And they're across a number of platforms. They're across training, they're across compute, they're across data. And of course, you know, the easy wins are around us working with you guys in tool wrapping and deployment of tools, workflow wrapping and deployment of workflows and the standards that are required to do that. So for us, what ELIXIR will bring to the Australian BioCommons is a friendly community that we can immediately leverage and join in with for Australia's benefit, but we will guarantee to contribute back into that community.
Excellent. This is music to our ears, I must say. And if I could have thank you, Andrew. If I could have the next slide and welcome Nicholas. No need to introduce Nicholas. Nicholas, from your perspective as director of ELIXIR, what are you the most excited about the Australian BioCommons bringing to ELIXIR?
So I've visited Australia a couple of times together with Andrew, and it's been really nice to see how the community has come together in Australia. And as Andrew said, in many ways it's equivalent to, I guess, to some of the larger nodes in ELIXIR. Australia is a big country, the distances are big, and it's also federal with those challenges. But I think, I mean, ELIXIR, and I said that yesterday, the distributed infrastructure we really are organized around our communities and around our people. And I think what we gain working with Australia is this global community. And in many of our technical areas, and we mentioned Galaxy and many others, I think it just expands the community and adds richness and additional perspectives to what we do. I think a particular area where I think we are keen to work in around the sensitive human data, but Australia also have many very interesting genomic resources, and I know bioplatforms and Andrew's team has been really deeply involved in, for instance, marsupial genomics. And so I think there are some areas of science where we would really lose out if we didn't work with Australia. So I think it's those two things for me. It's the expansion of the community working together globally, and really being able to collaborate around some of the specialized resources and find effective models for those.
Excellent. Well, you know, I'm a biodiversity person, so this is music to my ears to hear marsupial in a plenary session of ELIXIR. So maybe to finish, Niklas, I mean, it's been covered a little bit, but maybe is there a link to impact? This is why we are really joining forces with Australia. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but...
But I guess you are. No, but I think, I mean, for most of them, it's been evident in all the sessions for the last day and a half as well. I mean, a lot of what we do is really trying to align national operations around global standards, and we want to work together to make sure that those standards are robust, that then when we start to implement them at the national or institutional level, we have confidence that they will be around for a long time, but also confidence that there is a sort of a lively community that take those standards forward. And I think that's really the reason why we work with Australia or any of the global partners in ELIXIR, is really we want to expand that community and work together to drive the infrastructure part of standards forward. And it's really, I mean, actually what is nice with this year's virtual All Hands is that we can actually have increased participation of the Australian team. And I think that's been really, really nice. And Andrew and I have talked about this many times. I think the biggest challenge for us in this collaboration is really the time difference and the difference in the geographical distance. In Europe, it's relatively easy to come together and discuss them. And with Australia, it takes a bit more of an effort. But actually, when we've seen the COVID crisis, the work's done around Galaxy, it can be an opportunity as well, and it doesn't necessarily need to be an impediment. So I think it'd be really nice to see this develop, and I hope all of the communities and the workshops during this week make the most out of our new friends in Australia and try to bring them in the technical work.
Excellent. If I could have the last slide, please. I think we are almost up to our 15 minutes that Jen kindly gave to us. I just wanted to say this is an adventure, okay? We've never been there before. We kind of know where we're going, but maybe not exactly how we'll get there. And perhaps people will need facilitation, you know, introductions, a bit of help. So please contact myself and Christina, who is my counterpart on the Australian BioCommons. If you don't feel confident, annoying the busy directors in the first place, we're really happy to help.